And these two pipelines were in the planning stage when the Obama administration, under pressure from the environmentalists to try to cut back on oil production, et cetera, and prior to the actual meetings in Paris in December of 2015, that the Obama administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, protested the protested the XL pipeline because of this terrible sludge that they were going to be pumping all the way through the middle of the country, and it had these terrible chemicals in it, and any kind of oil spill would just poison the area anywhere it went. And so since it originated in Canada, the president had the authority through his executive decision-making to refuse permission as part of his ability to conduct treaties and stuff under his constitutional authority under Article 2. He, in fact, denied the authority to the Canadian pipeline company to build this pipeline down through the United States. So he had stopped that. And so the energy then turned to building this Dakota Access Pipeline. There was a major priority on getting this done. Yes?
So I think in Article 2 it says that the president needs to get approval from the Congress to ratify the treaties. Did that happen?
No, that's if it's a treaty. And in this particular case, that he has, as you see Trump now exercising tariff authority and all that stuff that he's doing, the President of the United States has certain authority that's delegated to him by Congress through various pieces of legislation that authorize the President of the United States to refuse to allow a private corporation from a foreign government to operate inside the United States if he chooses to. And so he exercised that authority to prohibit the Keystone XL from coming down into the United States. So Canada had the option of potentially building a pipeline from the tar sands in central Canada all the way to the west coast into the Pacific Ocean, or all the way to the east coast there. And so, but what they wanted to come due south, because they wanted to come all the way down to the oil refineries down on the Gulf of Mexico that were already there, and they didn't want to have to build new ones on the west coast or east coast, so that they were rabidly in favor of coming down through the United States to do this. But Obama had shut them off, and so what happened is they turned their energies into accelerating this Dakota Access Pipeline. And what they started doing, it was extraordinary, that what they did is their lawyers, this is the dark side of lawyering, the lawyers for the Dakota Access Pipeline Company, what they did is said, oh, wait a second, the Environmental Protection Act requires that if you are going to build an underground pipeline of more than like 500 feet, you need to apply for an environmental impact. You need to provide an environmental impact study, and then it has to be examined by the EPA, et cetera. But so what they did is the pipeline company kept applying for like 499 yard pipeline authorization, like you're going to build a pipeline from your house down to your boathouse or something. So they didn't have to apply for, they didn't have to undertake an EA, an environmental assessment, and they didn't have to do an environmental impact statement. And then they would build the 499 yards of the pipeline, and then they would stop and they would apply for another one. And they just kept on doing this. And they started coming down all the way from Stanley, all the way down in north of Bismarck. And then they were getting set to turn east to go 10 miles north of Bismarck to go to the go to the other side of the Missouri River and then southward. And what happened is that, and there's a big long debate about this, and we spent days investigating this, and it turns out that there was a report in the Bismarck Tribune that said that there had been a decision made to change the route of the pipeline from 10 miles north of Bismarck to 1/2 mile north of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. Because of, it said in the article, because of the opposition to building the pipeline 10 miles north of Bismarck because the people in Bismarck had opposed it out of a fear that it would contaminate their fresh drinking water. Okay? Now this is 10 miles north of their town. And we looked into it, and there are 5 or 6 little tributaries that the pipeline would cross that pipeline. There was no evidence that any of those little tributaries were instrumental in providing fresh drinking water to the city of Bismarck. But the Tribune article said that they because of the opposition on the part of the population of Bismarck, that there had been a decision made by the pipeline company to change the route of the pipeline, and instead of going due east there, it was going to turn and come down and go down southward, and it was going to go right through Lakota territory. I mean, and it turns out that the boundary line of the U.S. government recognized reservation, the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, stopped it was some 290 yards short of where the pipeline was going to be going. But all of that land was traditional Native American land. Worse yet, it had been originally part of the reservation, and that land had been taken away from them through an act of eminent domain back in 1954 by the Eisenhower administration. They just declared eminent domain over that area of land because they were going to build a dam, a hydroelectric dam on the Missouri River. And they wanted to back up the reservoir behind that dam to generate the electrical power through the turbines in that dam. And so that they just came in and they commandeered that territory from the Lakota people. I mean, after they'd already been driven off 99% of all their land and driven onto this little reservation, the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, the U.S. government comes in and unilaterally asserts eminent domain over their land and takes it away from them. And this was like 90% of the arable land where they were growing most of their food and where all the berry bushes were all along the Missouri River, etc. And there were lots of people lived there, and they just ousted them all. They ousted them all. And as it turns out, worse yet, this land where they were going to be building the pipeline on hadn't even become part of the reservoir. It was still completely dry land. And they had taken it under the auspices of needing that land to put the reservoir in, and they weren't even using that land anymore. But they still kept it. Okay? And it was supposed to expire 50 years after that, and it was going to be expiring in 1 more year. And then they were going to have to give that land back to the Lakota people, pursuant to that original exercise of eminent domain, because they hadn't used it. Okay? And so the pipeline rushes in and starts building the pipeline right there, and then they're going to build the pipeline under the Oahe River, or the Oahe Lake, which was the backed up reservoir. So what you got is the Missouri River coming down, the big hydroelectric dam being put in there. It backs up this big reservoir up onto the land of the Lakota people, up over what would be normally the boundary of the Missouri River, onto their land. And then this land is north of that, but it's not in the reservoir at all, and was destined to have to be given back to the Lakota people within a year. And so what the pipeline people did is they rushed in to get the pipeline built right through there, because they considered it part of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers land. It was owned by the United States as part of the dam that was built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So that was Corps of Engineers land. And so what happened is, as soon as the Lakota people who lived on Standing Rock found out that this was happening, Phyllis Young, who was a member of the tribal council, was assigned by the tribal council to figure out how to stop this pipeline. Well, it turns out that Phyllis Young works with us at the Lakota People's Law Office up there, okay? And that she and Madonna Thunderhawk and Chase Iron Eyes and a number of other people that work for and with our institute, that Phyllis started organizing the people to do something about this. So here's where we get a range of tactics that are available here. Now, so here comes the pipeline getting set to come within 250 yards or so of the technical border, the boundary of the new smaller Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, with the land having been taken away from it through eminent domain back in 1954, 1 year away from being returned to them. But on that land, that they're going to drill the pipeline, and they're going to go under Lake Oahe, which is the sole source of fresh drinking water for the people on the entire reservation, okay? And when the people find out about this, what happens is a group called Red Warrior Society. The Red Warrior Society is actually an English name for a band, not a band, but a warrior group that was part of the Ogallala. And the Ogallala are one of the 7 bands that are part of the Lakota Council Fire. Okay, and just for your basic information, the people of the 7 council fires, the Ocheti-Sacoan, Oyate they call them, that the people of the 7 council fires, there are, as you might guess, 7 different council fires. And one of the council fires is the Teton, the Teton people, and that's the council fire is the Teton, and then that's one of 7 different council fires. Each council fire has 7 bands, and that's where you get the Lakota and the Umpapa and the others, the Yakani. There are 7 bands. And each one of those 7 bands has 7 clans. And each one of the 7 clans has 7 Teoshpai, or large extended family. And each one of the Teoshpai have 7 Oshpai, which are other extended families. So the head of your Oshpai, the family head of the Oshpai, sits with the 6 other heads of the Oshpai that are part of the Teoshpai, and then they pick one of them to sit on the council of the Teoshpai. And then the 7 Teoshpai head men pick one of them to sit on the council for the clan. And then the 7 clansmen pick one of them to sit as on the board of the 7 members of the band. And then, of course, they pick one who sits on the council fire. And so this is the self-governing mechanism that the people had. And it's not a democratic system. It's not. They don't have voting. They don't put purple dye on your thumb because you voted. And they don't. You don't register to vote. What it is it's a process that has existed for thousands of years, by means of which the indigenous people determine what they're going to be doing collectively. Now, most of the time, they didn't have to convene the 7 council fires, because it wasn't something that all of the people in all 7 council fires had to deal with. The last time previous to this that they had actually gathered and met was the attack against Custer, and wiped out the 7th Cavalry. That was attempting, a long story there. And we could go on forever and ever about the history and the injustices to these people, as you might guess. But the bottom line is that of the Ogallala, which is one of the bands of the Teton Sioux, that they live down on the southern portion of what is called the state of South Dakota, right on the Nebraska border. In the Ogallala, are on a reservation that's called the Pine Ridge Reservation. And this is the place where they had the famous occupation of Wounded Knee. This is the location of the Wounded Knee camp, where back in 1891, actually 1890, December, there was this massacre that the 7th Cavalry slaughtered hundreds of women and children and old men that were there encamped, and slaughtered them. And it stands in infamy among the Lakota people. But this is where the famous occupation of Wounded Knee took place back in 1973, organized by the American Indian Movement, Russell Means and Dennis Banks and Vernon and Clyde Bellecourt and also Madonna Thunderhawk and others. And this is where I first became involved back in 1973. I was asked to come out and be co-counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union to actually be filing amicus briefs in the case of the occupation, because the federal government under Richard Nixon had come in and charged the leadership of the American Indian movement with insurrection, in rioting, in murder, and assault, and jaywalking and spitting on the sidewalk. They everything they could think of, they lowered the boom on the American Indian movement leadership. So we came in there and filed briefs to get all of the charges dismissed against all of them on the grounds of prosecutorial misconduct, because of a wide range of criminal activities that the FBI was engaging with in. And so we won that motion. And so because of that, I had gotten to know a significant number of the leadership of the American Indian movement. I became the attorney for Russell Means and a lot of different things that he was involved in. And I represented Madonna Thunderhawk and others. So I knew all the people sort of on a first name basis. And so I had gotten invited to come back in to South Dakota back in 2004 to work on a major problem of their children were being taken away again. And you probably have all heard that back in the 1880s, the United States government had this policy of physically removing children. When they got to be 5 years old, they would remove them from their parents and their entire Lakota culture and bring them to boarding schools and cut all their hair off and give them Christian names and beat them if they spoke their language, and trying to basically exterminate the native culture. That's what they were trying to do. And so this thing had begun again under W. Bush. W. Bush had instigated this program pursuant to which the State Department of Social Services were taking Lakota children away from their parents and away from their grandparents, away from their entire family and their entire culture, and putting them in all-white foster care settings. And I was asked to come in, and Sarah and I went in and met with the grandmothers and ascertained what was going wrong. We set up the Lakota People's Law Office in Rapid City. So we were there on site and had been on site since 2004 for 14 years, when in 2016 this decision got made to move the pipeline from 10 miles north of the 92% white community of Bismarck down to within 250 yards of the border of the 82% Native American Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. So the first people that mobilized to do something about this was a group called the Red Warrior Society of the Ogallala, one of the 7 bands of the Teton, and they were down on Pine Ridge, but they went up to Standing Rock. Now, it's important to conceptually here, and I'm not going to get too deep into this, but it's important that you understand that the United States government moved all of these people into these disparate reservations specifically for the purpose of keeping them away from each other, so they couldn't organize and they couldn't take collective action. Because at the time, like for example, when they established the Standing Rock reservation way up in North Dakota, it was longer than a couple days ride by horseback to get there. And so that they began to curry those people into viewing themselves as separate and distinct from the people, for example, down on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And they viewed themselves, were trained to try to perceive themselves as separate and apart from the people at Cheyenne River or from Rosebud or Yankton, or the other. There's 9 tribes there. They call them tribes, but there are 9 different reservations. And those reservations were originally prison camps. They were actually federal prison camps. And the Native people were ordered to be on those prison camps, and they had to wear this rope around their neck with a big printed tag with their ID and everything. And if they were found off the reservation, they could be legally murdered by any white person, and they'd be given a $100 reward. Okay, so that was the origin of these reservations in the attempt to conscientize the Native people into believing that they were separate and apart from each other, and to try to foist upon them this completely artificial identity as being a member of this, quote, tribe, like the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe There's no such thing as the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. There's no such thing. They're just the council fires, the bands, the clans, the Teoshpai, the Oshpai, etc. That's all that exists. But what happened is that the Ogallala people from this Red Warrior Society went up to Standing Rock, and they began to protest what was going on there. And so when the pipeline company tried to come down Route 186, I think it is. They come down Route 186 from Bismarck down to where the Standing Rock Reservation was, and bringing these big 18-wheelers, hauling these big bulldozers to come in to go up on the land to start bulldozing the land. The young people from the Red Warrior Society went up and stood in their way. And it turns out the police got called, the sheriff's department, the Morton County Sheriff's Department got called. And it turns out the pipeline people were going to be bulldozing a whole bunch of earth all the way to fill this big little gully that ran along the side of Route 186 up to where the land was, where they were going to build the pipeline. They were just going to take it onto themselves to be able to just dig up the earth and build this little earthen rampway on there, so all the equipment could come on up through there. No one ever asked how they got permission to do that. Nobody ever gave them permission to do that. They never applied for permission. They just started doing it. And so the people from the Red Warrior Society stood in the middle of the road and blocked them from coming in. And now this becomes really important here, because when you get like 8 or 10 or 20, major, beefed up Oglala, if you know what you're talking about, when you get Oglala warriors standing there bare-chested with war paint on in front of you, and you got this big 18-wheeler, and you're deciding as an individual truck driver, you're going to decide you're just going to drive right through there, there is a certain implied dimension of intimidation there, not unlike a strike, in a labor union where they put a picket line in front of a place. And it's varied down through history what degree of resistance the people in the strike line are going to give you if you try to cross the picket line. And so this is something we're going to be discussing in the next few meetings that we have together, of what degree of coercion can you use, what degree of implied threat can you use to try to stop these people who have taken complete control of an entire juridical set of institutions. Not only taken control of them, created all of these juridical institutions to foster and promote their own interests. And so that you have to face the Gandhi question of how much of your life are you going to be devoting to trying to make the rules that they have written for their own benefit to operate against their interests and on behalf of someone who they view as an ultimate other, as Steve Bannon made so clear, that he views the indigenous people as the enemy, as the ultimate other, the people against whom there has to be a new third world war, because they're enemies of capitalism, and they're going to take measures against them because they've had bad experiences with indigenous people. They've had a tough time with the people in Vietnam. They had a tough time with the people in Algeria. They've had a tough time with people in the Middle East, in Afghanistan. They thought they could just go in and kind of mow them down or roll over the top of them or bomb them into oblivion, and somehow these people just keep on coming. And they haven't quite grokked the fact that it's because you're invading their hometown. You're invading their indigenous territory, and they view you as complete invaders. And that's the problem that they've got. And so this is the set of questions that we're going to be faced with now, is to have a discussion about what the role is of the indigenous people in attempting to supplement whatever it is that the white community can do given the fact that the white community, I'll just state it bluntly, are all chicken shit, and that they're all right inside the system, and they all reap the benefits of the system, and they don't want to do anything to rock the boat, and, heaven forbid that they spend a night in jail. I mean, what are their friends going to think? What are their family going to think? And so that there are limitations on what it is that most of the people in the white community are willing to do. And there are others, minority groups, that are being invited into the white community on the peripheries, I might point out, of black people who are well educated, Asian people that are coming in to participate in the system, but they're all part of a juridical system that is willing to distribute certain benefits to them if they stay within the lines. And so that those lines are drawn in a way, like there's an old famous New Yorker cartoon where there's this little boy and little girl standing there. He's all buffed and scrubbed with a little shirt and tie. He's got a little bow tie, and the girl's standing there in her little dress. And the principal is saying to them, I want to thank you, kids, for being so polite in your protest. Now get your little ass out of my office. And at which point they will turn on their heel and leave. Okay? And that's the issue that we're confronted by here, is that the overwhelming majority of the white people and the people that are aspiring to become part of the white power structure in North America want to stay within the boundaries. And the boundaries have been drafted by the elite, by the corporate lawyers, by their judges that they've appointed to the judicial branch, and the legislators whose campaigns they now pay for directly under Citizens United. And they want to stay within the boundaries. So the question is that two things. What percentage of the white community can be talked into doing whatever it is that's necessary to stop global climate change? And what is it that the native indigenous population is willing to do because they've seen the model throughout the world of the indigenous people actually being able to rise up, and even with primitive tools at their disposal, to be able to eject white Western imperialists from coming into their indigenous homeland and harvesting their resources. Okay? And that they have seen that it can be done, and they have been successful in driving them out of there. And so these two questions are what we're going to be dealing with in the final three of our gatherings together, is to what lengths are white people willing to go? What are the steps that need to be taken to exhaust all of your administrative remedies? How long do you have to stay at this? Do you have to be thrown off the train? Do you have to be thrown off the train for being a WOG? In one of their first-class cabins. And it may be true, but you may have a higher level of consciousness to be able to see that you should come on over before that has to happen to you, to voluntarily be willing to do what it is that's necessary. Now that includes, of course, as I said, doing everything that you can possibly do inside their juridical system to shame them, to confront them with their own rules and regulations, to try to enforce their own rules and regulations against them. We stand at the present moment, for example, with a federal court injunction issued by a white judge up in Montana, stopping the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline on the grounds that it fails to comply with the Environmental Protection Act. So we are at the present moment holding off the construction of the pipeline. But every single day, we see all the forces of the pipeline people assembling pipe, bringing in cars and trucks, bringing in bulldozers. They're just getting ready because they know that decision is going to go up to the Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Trump administration and the Federalist Society are all appointing 236 new federal judges. And they're just feathering them into all the places they need to get control on behalf of the corporations. And not only that, even people in the Democratic Party know that. And they will actually say it. in the hearings for those judges. I will not vote for this judge because he's a stooge for the corporations. Like White House, for example, will say that from the Rhode Island, the senator, et cetera. And they'll say it. And they'll lay out in detail why that person should not be there, because they're just a minion for the corporate interests. And they'll actually say it, but that's all they'll do. That's all they'll do. They'll say that, and then they'll vote against them, knowing full well that they're still going to go in. And they won't do anything to disrupt the normal functioning procedures, because they've become dependent as a beneficiary of all of those perks from that system. And they won't do it. So the question is, what are the lengths to which we have to go to preserve the legitimacy of the juridical structures that exist, knowing that they've been created by the elite for their own benefit, and that they're victimizing the indigenous and the poor people of the world, to participate with or to be of assistance to the indigenous people of the world, if they in fact have decided that they're going to do what it is that's necessary to protect their very lives, to protect their very water, to protect their very children and their entire tribe to survive. Okay, so there's two parts of the equation here. Okay, so we're going to be discussing all of that in the next few classes, and I'm going to want you to write your paper at the end about what it is that you think you should do, given your areas of study, given your options, given where you are at your levels of education right now, and what your plans are for graduate school, et cetera. What do you think you should do? And what type of time period do you believe it obtains within which you have to do it? You may have in plan to have a whole 10-year graduate school career, of doing a PhD, in something. But, that it may behoove you to think in terms of getting out into the world post haste to try to deal with this situation right now. If, in fact, you believe the evidence. And that's assuming that you have benefited from the education that you've gotten up to this point in time to be able to understand evidence and what's getting ready to happen, but for your intervention. Okay? Thank you. So we'll be back, and I'll see you on Thursday.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com with your propaganda watch for this week. And it looks like the Department of Energy has a bit of explanation to do, or more specifically, the National Nuclear Security Administration, run by the DOE. What am I talking about? I'm talking about this. Don't fear the Green Reaper. The Department of Energy's creepy recycling mascot is here to save the day, according to Motherboard, which reports on the unsettling costume that was dreamt up by an employee at the agency that oversees America's nuclear stockpile. And here you can see the lovable Green Reaper here reaping the current crop of children to get them on board with sustainable energy or something like that. Reading from the report, nothing says sustainable energy like a green-clad Grim Reaper waving a flower-shaped scythe at children and demanding their promise to recycle on behalf of the government agency in charge of the nuclear stockpile. This is just one of the very jobs of the Green Reaper, the U.S. Department of Energy's horrifyingly adorable mascot. As first spotted by Reason, Freedom of Information Act requests from journalist Emma Best revealed that America's nuclear regulatory body decided to use the Green Reaper to raise awareness of sustainability goals, successes, and best practices. It's an odd makeover for death to don green robes and take a government paycheck to promote recycling on behalf of America's nuclear cops. Still, the mascot isn't as odd as it may sound. The DOE oversees energy production and conservation in addition to the handling of all nuclear materials, so spreading information about sustainability is in its purview. And it goes on to give information about how this Green Reaper came to be, and it talks about some of the events that it goes to promote sustainability and encourage bus ridership and other such things. What a bizarre, seemingly out of nowhere non sequitur. Like, why on earth is there this Grim Reaper character representing sustainability? And we may laugh at the humorous idea of some sort of green-clad Grim Reaper watching over this next harvest of children with his green scythe, but maybe it's nothing to laugh about. Yes, in addition to adding to the list of the not quite complete list of things supposedly caused by global warming, such as rising popcorn prices and killer cornflakes and literally Hitler, we can add climate grief. Climate grief to that list of things caused by global warming. What is this about? Oh, it's about the growing emotional toll of climate change. And this story, filed last December, starts by noting that when the UN released its latest climate report in October, it warned that without unprecedented action, catastrophic conditions could arrive by 2040. For Amy Jordan, 40, of Salt Lake City, a mother of 3 teenage children, the report caused a crisis. The emotional reaction of my kids was severe, she told NBC News. There was a lot of crying. They told me, we know what's coming and it's going to be really rough. She struggled too, because there wasn't much she could do for them. I want to have hope. The reports are showing that this isn't going to stop, so all we can do is cope. The increasing visibility of climate change, combined with bleak scientific reports and rising carbon dioxide emissions, is taking a toll on mental health, especially among young people, who are increasingly losing hope for their future. Experts call it climate grief. Depression, anxiety, and mourning over climate change. Last year, the American Psychological Association issued a report on climate change's effect on mental health. The report primarily dealt with trauma from extreme weather, but also recognized that gradual long-term changes in climate can also surface a number of different emotions, including fear, anger, feelings of powerlessness, or exhaustion. And it goes on to talk about all of the latest scaremongering before noting that this woman was able to find help in a 10-step program for climate grief. After the UN report was released, Jordan looked for a way to help her children cope. She saw a sign at her church for a support group that deals with the issue, the Good Grief Network. Founded by Amy Rowe, 30, and Laura Schmidt, 32, Good Grief offers a 10-step program to help people deal with collective grief. Issues that affect a whole society, like racism, mass shootings, and climate grief. An interesting mix there. The program runs as a 10-week cycle, each weekly meeting tackling a different step. It's currently in its third cycle in Salt Lake City and is also running online. The steps encourage participants to confront their climate fears and sadness and acknowledge that they are part of the problem as polluters in a carbon-fueled system, but also find the motivation and strength to be part of the solution. It goes on from here. I'll let you read through the whole report if you're so inclined. And of course, I will throw a link into the actual APA report that talked about climate health, mental health, and our changing climate. Impacts, implications, and guidance from March 2017 that talks about the impact of climate change on people's mental health. Some human health effects stem directly from natural disasters exacerbated by climate change. Other effects surface more gradually from changing temperatures and rising sea level that cause forced migration. Weakened infrastructure and less secure food systems are examples of indirect climate impacts on society's physical and mental health. And they go on to talk at great length and in great detail about how climate grief is becoming a very real thing. But let's concentrate on one particular aspect of this manufactured problem that is being pumped 24/7 through the mainstream media, which is a big hint, ding, 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 that maybe there's something more going on here than the dispassionate, objective reporting of reporters, journalists who just want to get to the facts about science. Maybe there's something more going on here, like the indoctrination of an entire generation of children. And this is where the Green Reaper stops being quite the funny, sort of silly, oh, isn't this a silly waste of government money, into something much more fundamentally disturbing. And in what way? Well, in order to understand that, we only have to look at something like this. No need to make horror films anymore. Look what is being done to our children. And the link here is to the School Strike for Climate Save the World video from TEDx, the TEDx talk by Greta Thunberg of, I believe the organization is called No More Time? Need More? We Don't Have Time. Yeah, I knew it was something along those lines. Something appropriately scaremongering. So for people who don't know about Greta Thunberg and the incredible 100% propaganda push that is on right now to indoctrinate children and then recruit them into the climate cult, striking for action and all of this. And what is it really at root of this? I'm going to point to a very important series of reports on wrongkindofgreen.org, The Manufacturing of Greta Thunberg, which is a 6-part investigative series looking not just at Greta Thunberg and what she is doing, the part she is playing in spreading this propaganda and further traumatizing an entire generation of children into believing there's only 12 years left and we're all gonna die. And who is really behind this organization, the We Don't Have Time organization. And it's an incredible story that I won't do justice to by just summarizing and giving bits and pieces here and there, but suffice to say, there are massive mega corporations with massive amounts of funding, very politically connected, that are trying to access $100 trillion worth of pension investments as part of a global Ponzi swindle that is taking place right under our nose, and with the use of children who are being traumatized as part of a propaganda conditioning push. This is insanity. This is insanity. What is being done to the children of this day and age regarding this, appropriately enough, this 10-step program for overcoming climate grief and other collective grief issues being advertised in a church, because this is the modern religion that people are being indoctrinated into, where the climate polluters, the sinners, there's original sin. Being born and breathing oxygen means that you are sinning. And there's only one way to atone for that, other than, killing yourself. But the only way to atone to that, of course, is to pay your carbon tithes to the masters of this system. It's incredibly insidious how deep this propaganda conditioning goes into the psyche of human beings and what makes them tick. There is a reason that religious institutions have flourished throughout human history. It is because there are certain basic psychological motivations that are played on, and these are the exact motivations that are being played on here. Climate grief and the shame over our original carbon sin is a propaganda construct that is being woven around us. And do you remember, this is not something new, and this is not coming out of nowhere. This is something that's been developing for years and years and years and being pushed as part of a concerted propaganda effort, which included, do you remember, several years ago when one of these We Don't Have Time like climate action groups put out a humorous little propaganda campaign where they were going around saying anyone who doesn't want to participate in the recycling programs or whatever it is, that's fine, no pressure, but we will kill you and your children if you don't go along with that. Oh, what a funny little ad campaign. Do you remember that ad campaign? Because Pepperidge Farm remembers.
A UK global warming activist group hoping to kick off their new initiative to encourage people to reduce their carbon emissions by 10% per year has faced fierce backlash over a promotional video for their campaign. The video features an imaginary scenario in which everyone who does not volunteer to join the campaign is killed in a violent and bloody explosion. Targets of the grisly explosions, which show the victims' bodies torn apart and splattered blood and body parts covering all of the eco-friendly onlookers, include office workers and even school children.
Now, no pressure at all, but it'd be great to get a sense of how many of you might do this. Just a rough percentage. That's fantastic! And those not? Philip and Tracy. That's fine, that's absolutely fine. Your own choice. Okay, class, thank you so much for today, and I will see you all tomorrow. Oh, just before you go, I just need to press this little button here. Now, everybody, please remember to read chapters 5 and 6 on volcanoes and glaciation. Except for Philip and Tracy, of course.
The short film ends with another grisly act of eco-slaughter, with the victim's remains splattering the screen and the campaign slogan, "No pressure," being written literally in the victim's blood. Unsurprisingly, the video was pulled from the campaign's webpage and YouTube channel, as thousands of comments and emails flooded in decrying the overt advocacy of genocide inherent in the ad. In a press release posted on the campaign's website, the organizers write, quote, "With climate change becoming increasingly threatening and decreasingly talked about in the media, we wanted to find a way to bring this critical issue back into the headlines whilst making people laugh. Many people found the resulting film extremely funny, but unfortunately some didn't, and we sincerely apologize to anybody we have offended." End quote.
Oh, yeah. Oh, extremely funny. Oh, wasn't it so funny when those children exploded and their blood and guts went all over their classmates because they refused to participate in the global warming climate cult and its rituals? Oh, child sacrifice. Such a knee slapper. Gets me every time. What are these people thinking? What is wrong with these people's brain that would even occur to them as something to just make a nice lighthearted little ad for our little propaganda campaign to promote our cult? Why would anyone do that? It's because this is not some random idea or image that just came to some stupid marketer someday. This is a core part of the ideology that is indoctrinating an entire generation into a system of beliefs and, more importantly, practices that will remain with them throughout their life, if the propagandists and the would-be social engineers have their way. Again, this is not by coincidence, this is by design. Someone who hit the nail right on the head about this subject very recently is previous CorbettReport.com guest Jeffrey Tucker, who wrote this essay, "The Socialists Always Come for the Kids, Eventually." And I don't think he even probably realizes exactly how right he is in this article, but he does hit the nail squarely on the head, pointing out AOC in her sweet potato video makes a passing remark that suggests some anxiety about whether people ought to have kids. And he goes on to relate this to the anarchy of human production and ultimately how eugenics is still with us. And how ultimately one thing that a central planner cannot abide is the anarchy of human production. People deciding when and how to have children and having children on their own without state intervention. We can't have that. We're going to have to start limiting people's human production, which is why it always comes down to that in the most hardcore of hardcore centrally planned economies, like in communist China and other places. There will be literal laws on the books about how and when and how many children you can have. And do you not think that is coming? Do you not think this is where this conditioning, this climate grief propaganda is going? Because I'm telling you, it is. In fact, if you've been following the news lately, it's already here.
Sticking with the environment, there is a growing group of women who say they are on a birth strike. They're too scared, they say, to have children because of what they call ecological Armageddon. Let's meet some of them in an exclusive TV interview. Blythe Pepino, who is here. She's the founder of Birth Strike, and Alice Brown, who's 25 and says she's so scared about the future of the planet, it's actually debilitating for her. Welcome, both of you. Why are you on Birth Strike, Blythe?
Because I'm terrified, and that's putting it mildly. So our planet is in a kind of collapse. The natural world is collapsing around us, and that's actually happening right now. And I'm so disappointed by the response by our authorities to this crisis, and so freaked out by it. Everything that I've read, that I've basically last year I came to the decision that I couldn't bring a child into that. And I was asking around people that I know, put it a little bit out on Facebook, and realised actually quite a lot of other people are making this decision. And so we realised it was really, really important to tell the public that there are people out there that are so scared about this that they feel that they can't actually have a family.
And you have come to the same conclusion, Alice?
Yeah, I have. I mean, each day for me is a struggle. I really do. I'm so depressed. I feel so hopeless over how, I'm reading just in the last couple of months even that, insect numbers are plummeting so fast. It now threatens the collapse of nature, that we're losing biodiversity. We're not losing, we're destroying biodiversity so quickly that threatens our food, and the UN have said that could lead to the risk of our own extinction. David Attenborough going on TV to say the collapse of civilization could come from this, and I know that is so hard to really sit with and take in, but I have done that, and that has led to just a fear that I've never felt before, and my decision for being on birth strike mostly has come from not wanting to pass that fear on to someone else. If we're in this situation now, even since my parents had me, we've destroyed 60% of life on this planet. What would that be like when my child's my age? Will there be 10% left? That's not just to do with being, a nature wildlife enthusiast like I am. That's dangerous as well.
It's a life and death situation.
That's right. There is now something called the birth strike movement, which is encouraging women to refuse to have children because they believe the Earth is in crisis due to climate change. Climate grief to literal carbon eugenics in one easy step. I really hope that this sounds familiar to you, because if it does, then thank you for having paid attention to me and what I've been screaming about for a literal decade now. It was a decade ago that I made my first video on carbon eugenics, trying to tie this together using the historical parallel that is there. In fact, it's not a parallel. It is literally the history of the modern environmental movement and the carbon eugenics movement from the literal eugenicists of old. I traced that history very carefully in Why Big Oil Conquered the World for those who didn't see it. It's a literal through line that goes from eugenics in the late 19th, early 20th century to the environmental movement and climate change in the late 20th and early 21st century towards technocracy, which will be the future of the 21st century. It's right there in black and white, and this is how it's done, tying this thread through. It's all about directing the human population and controlling the human population in every sense, including, of course, the most literal sense now of literally encouraging people, voluntarily, of course. It's all up to you, but we're going to die. The Earth is going to die in 12 years because we've just screwed everything up with our carbon sins, and every child that you put onto this planet is 56.8 tons of carbon dioxide per year added to our collective carbon guilt. And I know I'm not just pulling that number out of thin air. I'm going, of course, by the IPCC and its report on the world's climate trends, which just happens to note that having one child less per family will save 58.6 tons of CO2 per year. Because when I look at my children running around, growing up, learning, playing in the park, I think, oh, look at all that CO2 they're putting out onto this planet. Oh, it's so horrible. This is insanity, and it has to stop. We have to collectively snap out of it. And those of you who are awake and aware and understand this propaganda for what it is should be screaming from the rooftops about this. Do not go quietly into the good night as they literally march us into this technocratic eugenics enslavement grid in the name of the climate grief propaganda that they're shoving down our throats from birth with the Green Reaper and everything else. This is the game for all the marbles, and unfortunately, it is an exceptionally effective game that plays on our most fundamental psychological weaknesses. There's a lot more to be said about this, but of course, please do follow the notes, follow the links from the show notes for this video so that you can discover more about this and really delve into the nitty-gritty. Go to The Wrong Kind of Green, read about the manufacturing of Greta Thunberg, learn about the billions and billions and ultimately trillions of dollars that are on the line for big name, big stakes players in the economy to manufacture this new reality of climate grief and climate guilt and climate sin and climate tithing that is all being stitched together for us. And ultimately, of course, climate eugenics, which is the next stage in this game. I cannot stress enough how important it is. And if you have been affected by this propaganda conditioning, or you know people who are and are under the psychosis of this climate grief, know that this is a very well understood psychological phenomenon called learned helplessness, where if you put someone in a situation and then tell them no matter what you do, no matter how you struggle, no matter anything that you do, you're still going to die a horrible death or you're going to receive pain or shock in some manner, well, that person is eventually going to give up. And that is where they want the population to give up. If you would like to overcome that, might I humbly suggest that you also take a look at the link in the show note that I'll put there to Overcoming Learned Helplessness, which was an episode of Corbett Report Radio back in the day. And I will have more to say on that particular subject in the near future. But as I say, this is the game for all the marbles. And although the Green Reaper might come across your newswire and seem like just another silly story of government incompetence or waste, it's much more than that. And it goes to a very dark place. A place that none of us want to go. That's going to do it for this week. James Corbett, CorbettReport.com. Available now from CorbettReport.com. Oil. The 19th century was transformed by it. The 20th century was shaped by it. And the 21st century is moving beyond it. But who gave birth to the oil industry? And what are they planning to do with that power in a post-carbon world?
Heirs to an oil fortune join the divestment drive.
There is a price to carbon in their future.
The negative impact of population growth.
That is important not only for the planet, it is important for the business.
What do you see as the biggest challenges in conservation?
The growing human population.
How and why big oil conquered the world. Watch the documentary for free or purchase a DVD copy at CorbettReport.com/bigoil.